Hi everyone, this is Sarah from Hamilton. Today's video is going to be a discussion of the nature of the divine counsel in the Let Us text of Genesis 1. As you probably know, the Let Us make man in our image has traditionally been taken as a reference to the persons of the Trinity. Contemporary scholars of the Hebrew Bible, following some ancient traditions, have seen instead a reference to the divine council, that is, God's court filled with heavenly beings, angels, powers, thrones, dominions, so on and so forth, so that the us of Let Us does not refer to the persons of the Trinity, but rather refers to these created angels. In this video, I am going to respond to this by arguing that, in fact, the two readings need to go together, and indeed they imply each other in such a way that elucidates why it is that God would create such a thing as the divine counsel. So the divine counsel, I think, is relevant to the text in Genesis 1, but the Trinitarian reality is distinctly present as the basis for that counsel. After all, that God's creative self-extension into contingent being should take conciliar form is itself an aspect of natural revelation in creation. The typical language used to describe the counsel of God is also suggestive, sons of God being the most clearly Trinitarian. Proverbs 8:22 and following summarizes the narrative of creation week through the lens of wisdom. The word in 8 verse 22 means, I think, begotten, and thus links the beginning of Proverbs, which is addressed to a son who is called to become wise, and the end, which asks whether the reader has the wisdom to know the name of God and the name of his son. Within Genesis itself, God's first-person speech is often used explicitly where God is addressing himself. Most clearly is in Genesis 8:21-22, where God addresses himself in his heart. That the text narrates a divine verdict sets it in the context of the heavenly court, especially in view of the judgment scene in Genesis 6, where God sees and pronounces the world not good, decreeing judgment. Referring back, of course, to Genesis 1, where God sees and pronounces the world good. That this takes place in the context of a courtroom is significant because the divine counsel is the divine courtroom. That God alone, moreover, is specified as the active agent in man's creation seems to me to suggest that this is to be taken according to a Trinitarian nuance. God speaks in his own Trinitarian life, creating man as a corporate organism. The name belongs, through Genesis 5:1-2, to man with a capital M, that is, the human family, who's both male and female, not so much individual persons. God creates with a let us because he creates a single image, the human family, which is a plural unity, male, female, and begotten children. Genesis 4:1-2 shows God as the divine begetter, where Eve says that she has gotten a man with the Lord. A major theme in Genesis is again stated explicitly in Genesis 14, where he is the begetter of heaven and earth. Genesis 11 broadens the story, taking place as it does after the heavenly rebellions narrated or manifested in Genesis 3 and 6. Here again we have the creation of a plurality in the existence of mankind. But in this case, plurality is unqualified by unity until Pentecost. The let us of this divine council scene, that is, let us go down and scatter their lip, includes the rebels on the divine councils. And thus there is intertextuality with Deuteronomy 32:8-9, where God divides the nations according to the number of the sons of God, and the rest of the prophetic song, where God ultimately conquers his supernatural foes. And as in 1 Kings 22, the evil angels act as agents in God's divine judgment upon the nations. God confuses both the language and the worship, or lip, of the nations by allowing the no-gods after whom they sought to successfully prey upon their minds and hearts. The structure of the glory cloud is also indicative of a Trinitarian theme in Genesis 1. Exodus 14:19-31 follows out the 7 creation days of Genesis 1 in narrating the passage of Israel through the Red Sea. beginning with the reference to the angel of God in the glory cloud which lit up the night, and followed by the division of the waters of the Red Sea, echoing the darkness of Genesis 1, followed by light and a division of the waters. The upshot for the present purpose, however, is that the hovering Spirit of God in 1:2 is identified with, or at least connected to, the glory cloud which descends upon Mount Sinai. When Moses in Deuteronomy 33 says that the Lord came on Sinai with thousands of his holy ones, we see the basic pattern which exists in the glory cloud. It is the cloud of divine presence, permeated by the angelic powers, and most importantly, having the angel of the Lord at its center, i.e., the Son or Logos of God. Whether or not one would need the New Testament to identify the divine angel with the Son, the reality of a plenitude of divine persons, one from whom revelation comes and one through whom the message comes, seems well established. This is consistent with what the prophetic books later say. In a cloud, Ezekiel sees the chariot of God, animated by the Spirit, piloted by angels, and carrying one enthroned who is in the likeness of a man. In light of these things, Genesis 1:1 and following is seen as having remarkably and beautifully precise narrative logic to it. God creates the heavens as well as the earth. The latter is unformed, empty, and invisible. If the Spirit in Genesis 1:2 is what was just suggested, which is not original to me but was developed by Meredith Kline in his book Images of the Spirit, then the one being described is the Logos. The world is unstructured, so the Logos of its structure, being the pattern for heaven, now descends to terrestrial reality and begins to brighten, structure, and fill it. Given this, the divine counsel is thus present in Genesis 1 from 1:2 onwards, because it is the counsel of God which exists in God's glory cloud, signified by the Spirit. But it is the inner dialogue in God which is being underscored in 1:26-28. This makes vivid sense of Job 38. When the foundations of the earth are laid, the heavenly council rejoices. They were there, having descended in the glory of Genesis 1:2, counselors and witnesses of the enthroned Logos and angel of the Lord at the heart of the cloud. I think we see in Genesis 18-19, which is narrating the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah, a sign of the unity between the Trinitarian and divine conciliar overtones when the Lord, having come down from heaven, similar to the statement about going down in Genesis 11, with his two judicial witnesses, or created angels, to inspect and judge the cities of the plain, acts in 19:24, which says that the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. As a standalone verse, it could be dismissed as an unusual turn of phrase, perhaps, but the context is striking. Heaven is the locus of the council, and thus a representation of its authority. Note the celestial imagery in relation to sovereignty, underscored by the note in Genesis that the sun had risen on Zoar as fire rains from heaven. In context, we have already encountered the signs of judicial proceedings. God has chosen to include Abraham in the business of heavenly state, as it were. Two created angels accompany the Lord to formally examine the case brought against Sodom, and to bear a name is to bear the authority signified by that name. Thus, my name is in him, being said concerning the angel of the Lord. So that a Trinitarian reading of 19:24 has a strong contextual basis. This is the divine Son, revealing the Father who is in heaven and making known his will in the process of enacting it. It is the Son who concretely and visibly makes him known, joined by created angels who share in his work and ratify it. So the twofold presence of the Lord is genuinely a hypostatic two-ness, the Father in heaven revealed in and through his word and counsel, both human, Abraham, and angelic in the two angels who follow the angel of the Lord in examining Sodom. This counsel enacts his purpose in this pattern of activity. Showing that a Trinitarian and divine conciliar reading are conceptually compatible does not, of course, demonstrate that we actually need both, if only one explanatory model is sufficient. But I think the points about divine self-deliberation, the noted and explicit presence of the angel of the Lord, especially since members of the council in some texts are called angels, and the description of heavenly fire coming from the Lord calling heavenly fire from the Lord out of heaven, all of this gives us reason to think that a multiplicity multiplicity of persons has greater explanatory force in reading the text of Genesis 1:26 to 28.